So thank you for having us here. My name is Nelson Switzer. I work at Loop Industries. I've been here just about 10 months. Before that, I was with Nestle Waters, where I was the Chief Sustainability Officer. And while I was there, I helped bring clarity to the existential challenge that we were facing at Nestle. The existential challenge of the single-use plastic bottle being the symbol of plastic waste in the world, and truly being leveraged. And I challenged the company and I said, if this is an existential crisis for us, and truly it was, and I still believe it is, how do we take this symbol of plastic waste and turn it into a symbol of the circular economy? How do we genuinely create shared value, which is a fundamental principle? So in doing that, I got to really, myself and my team really got to travel around and identify new technologies, new ideas, new concepts that we might be able to help bring to market. And one of them was Loop. A member of my team called me and said, Nelson, I found it. Got to get up here. And believe it or not, it's in Canada, of all places. My office is down in Connecticut. And of course, I took personal offense. But I said, okay, I'll come up. I'm going to go see this. Came up, and there on the table, while the CEO, a visionary man, Daniel Solomita, who was out in our factory in Teflon today, while he was explaining to me the concept, which I will tell you in a moment, I watched them take a PET bottle and depolymerize it, that is, break it down into its chemical components, right there in front of my eyes. No special chemicals, no heat, no energy, just right there, fundamental chemistry, and broke it down. And then he showed me how they take those chemicals, purify them, and put them back together to create virgin quality, food-grade PET. This is the solution that consumer packaged goods companies, that users of polyester fiber around the world are searching for. How do I take waste material that right now is going to landfill, ending up in our rivers and oceans? How do I bring it back? How do I contain it within the economy and keep it out of the environment? I think there's some confusion about what the circular economy really is and what it means. The circular economy is a very simple principle that says that all resources that we harvest from the earth should be regarded as something we have harnessed, not harvested. We harness and we maintain that resource, that energy, that matter within a cycle endlessly. We do not let it escape. But more than that, it also requires that any activity we undertake is restorative of the environment and creates economic value. And if you think about that, that's actually the role of government. The role of government is really to try to protect our environmental, social, and natural capital and leverage it to grow our economy so that society can prosper. That's the principle of the government. That's the principle of society. And that is the fundamental understanding of the circular economy. And that is what Loop is doing. Our job, our mission, is to really accelerate the world's shift away from, towards sustainable plastic and away from our dependence on fossil fuels. We have mined enough fossil fuels and transformed that into polyester, PET, and other plastics that we no longer need to go after new fossil fuels. We can take what we have already mined, bring it back into our economy, and ensure it stays there. And our vision is rather modest, as you can see. It's simply to be the world's leading supplier of plastic. So we've had a heck of a journey. This started, like a lot of really, some of the coolest innovations in our world did, in a garage. Our founder, Daniel Solomita, he met somebody who said, I actually know this other guy. If you're doing something plastic, I met this other guy. He's kind of a crazy scientist, but he told me he was doing something around with plastic as well. Maybe you guys should meet. And so this doctor, Hatem Essadam, brought his 2 young sons, a bunch of beakers and some solutions, to Daniel's garage. And there, he showed him how they could depolymerize, which is a fancy term for just saying break down, but break down this plastic. Now, they weren't quite sure exactly what they had. Certainly the solutions they were using were very expensive, and the prospect of commercializing it was still in question. But after doing this, Daniel took those chemicals to the University of Montreal and said, hey, what have we done here? And they confirmed, indeed, they had broken down this PET into its two base monomers. Now, this to me was a breakthrough moment, a genuine breakthrough moment. They spent the next 4 months in Daniel's garage trying to figure out, is there a commercially viable combination of chemicals and catalysts that can allow us to do this? And if so, how do we build it further? And they did. They found a methodology for actually breaking it down into its two components. So they spent, they basically went from there to a pilot plant. We are now in Terrebonne, Quebec, which is just about 30, 40 minutes from here, where we have an industrial pilot plant that operates. It's pretty impressive. I will tell you, when I first visited it in 2016, I think it was, it really did blow my mind. And I offered Daniel right there the full weight of Nestle's financial resources. I said, what do you need right now for me to go back to Nestle to get you the financial backing you need to bring this to commercialization? And he said, I don't want it. I don't want your investment. And I was very confused by that, because you'd think a startup wants to get all the money that they can to really, but he said, I don't want your money, because I don't want to be beholden to one company. My vision is to transform the whole world. And if I do this just with you, what's going to happen to Coke and Pepsi and all of these other companies who also have a need for this material? I thought it was incredibly genuine, and it compelled me to want to work with him even more. So, it's been a couple of years' journey. Clearly, they were still working on their technology, developing and moving forward. I was still working at Nestle, but we now have agreements with the likes of Coca-Cola, European partners. We've got Switzer, we've got Pepsi, and a variety of others. But this is our process. What I love about it is its simplicity. Now, we take the waste PET, the waste polyester fiber, the unloved material, if you were. You see, mechanical recycling exists for this material. But what it is actually a downcycling economy, not an upcycling economy. And a downcycling economy does this. It takes material, it puts it into some sort of process, and then the material you get out of it actually has lower value. See, each time you recycle a PET bottle, for example, like an empty water bottle, there are contaminants within that material. Each time you heat it, the polyester chains within it, actually degrade. So you can actually only reuse it a few times. Most people are familiar with this process when it comes to paper. You can only recycle paper so many times before the fibers become too short. But what our process does is we take this material, we put it into our reactor, and we add our proprietary chemical catalyst, which specifically targets only PET. So what we're able to do is, if we've got this mix of material that's rejected by mechanical recyclers because it's got colors in it, it's got dye in it, it has ketchup and mustard in it, it's got all sorts of other what are known as contaminants in the industry, for us that's no problem. Even if there's other plastics like HDPE, LDPE, polypropylene, our catalyst specifically targets just the PET, which means the output that you get from our process is 3 components. Monomer 1, monomer 2, those are the building blocks, and then the waste material. We move that on into a mechanical separation process. So the first monomer moves along, and that's a solid. It comes out kind of like a white powder, almost like flour. But also, within there are all of the insoluble impurities, if you think about all those other plastics and so on. But it's very easy to just screen that material out. We separate out the insolubles. We move the plastics that a mechanical recycler can work on, such as HDPE and so on, and we ship that to them. We then continue to pass that material through, and it goes through an evaporation process, and we purify it, and we yield virgin quality. It's called DMT, this particular molecule. We do the same thing with the liquid phase. So the liquid phase, which comes out, which is ethylene glycol, we distill that. And through distillation, we're left with all the soluble impurities. I mean, those are the dyes, colorants, and so on. And what we're left with is, again, another virgin monomer. We then take those 2 monomers, which are now virgin quality, we repolymerize them to create what we call Loop-branded PET. It's so simple that each time, and this was that confusion I had when my team member came to me and told me about this, actually what I said to him was, I don't believe it. It's too simple. But that's the genius. You know, I've tried to spend a lot of my time in my career trying to make the complex stuff simpler. And so when I see stuff like this, I'm quite motivated. So a few elements that are really important to know that make our technology so unique, so distinct, and so important. The first is that we're able to conduct our depolymerization without the need for heat and energy. If you've heard of chemical depolymerization or chemical recycling at all, you'll know that many of them, all of them other than us, use heat, pressure, microwaves, and all sorts of other energy-dependent stimulants to begin the chemical reaction. We do not, because of the particular type of catalyst that we use. That, of course, without that energy, it means that the footprint is more favorable environmentally. It also means it's more commercially viable as well, because we're not spending that additional money on those elements. So I mentioned this before, of course, we can upcycle. We call it upcycling. We can take the material that nobody else can use, and we can recycle that material, bring it back to virgin quality. Our process meets the requirements of the FDA for use in food-grade packaging, but not just the FDA. It also meets it for the EU, China, India, Japan. We're talking about markets. For example, India, it's actually legislated that you cannot use recycled material for food-grade packaging because they're concerned about the contamination issues. Rightly so. Our material is, in fact, viable in that market. And I gotta tell you, as a Canadian, I love the idea that we are exporting this Canadian invention all over the world. And that our Canadian invention is what is accepted in every jurisdiction. So far, the ones we've applied to. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, this is virgin quality material. It's virtually indistinguishable. So that's pretty amazing. That means if you are in the business of converting, which basically means you take resin and then you put it into your molds and so on, you convert that into a package or some sort of a product, you don't have to worry about changing your equipment or special monitors or special rates of operation. This happens very often with mechanically recycled material because it has certain impurities and so on, and so sometimes the lines will stick or slow down or you'll have to adjust the equipment. This is not a problem or an issue with our material. We're really taking a commercial solution to solve a gross environmental challenge. We've got two very important partners as well on the operational side. So the first is Indorama Ventures, one of the largest companies in the world that nobody's heard of, unless you're in the PET business. They are the world's largest PET manufacturer. They are fully integrated. We have a 50-50 joint venture with them in which what we do through this joint venture is we retrofit their existing facilities. So they have existing facilities that produce virgin quality or virgin PET. But we are helping them convert those facilities that make sense into loop production facilities. So helping now to make that transition to a sustainable plastic that is decoupled from fossil fuels. Think about us as basically the drop-in substitute for the fossil fuels that would otherwise be needed. We're taking the petrol at a petrochemical. But that's what we are. We are a petrochemical company, a waste to resin company. And that's what our second partnership is about with ThyssenKrupp. ThyssenKrupp, very familiar to people who ride the elevator. You see them? They're also the world's foremost engineering firm when it comes to polyester plants. So they build them all over the world. And we have struck a global alliance agreement with them to develop what we call our loop integrated waste to resin facilities. And at these facilities, essentially what we do is we strategically locate these facilities close to large urban centers. Why? Because that's where the feedstock is. Why? Because that's where the demand for the resin is, because that's where the bottlers are, and that's where the food packagers are. So no longer do you need to be tied to the large oil infrastructure and have massive units. Instead, we can have discrete units, strategically located urban centers, and create jobs where people live. Divert the material before it actually gets shipped somewhere else to then fall into a river, fall into the ocean. This is a huge, 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 huge game-changing opportunity. as you can tell, I'm a little excited about it. So really, what do? We're here to help solve the owners, the issue of the brand owners. When I was at Nestle, one of the things that I talked about with them was our responsibility is to solve the issue we've caused. And make no mistake about it, we are part of, when I say we, Nestle, just like any other company that puts something out into the ether that they don't take back. You are responsible. You have a responsibility. That's why they call it extended producer responsibility and so on. So I said, let's solve the issue that we've caused. Let's go further. And then let's make sure that we're seen doing it. So here's what we're doing at Loop to help. Number one, we provide them this material so that they can have a 100% recycled content within their packaging, which is fantastic. But the second thing is, any customer that actually brings this material on, so they include it in their package, actually has to place the Loop logo on their package. And it's funny, when I say have to, they're now asking for it. It's no longer, please will you do it, I really want you to. It's, they want it. Because it's become a symbol, it's become a badge. And Forbes magazine actually cited us as the Intel inside of plastic. Because of what we're doing. It's developing that affinity brand that indicates to the consumer the type of product this is. We are also, as I mentioned, we're providing this turnkey manufacturing solution. All of these different types of industries. If you're a waste manager, if you're a chemical producer, a PET manufacturer, even consumer goods companies are coming to us saying, I want to invest in a facility. Can I build 1, 2, 5, 10 facilities around the world? And so through our partnership with Tyson Group, we're building this licensing model that allows us to expand this. And last, of course, which is the most important to me personally as, I'll say a suit-wearing environmentalist, is providing a home for this waste, making sure it stays in the economy and out of the environment. So